In this video, I'll show you my process for EQ and compression for a soft female vocal. The singer in this session is Christine. She's the same singer from the very first mic shootout that we did. However, it's a different song and one of the mics that wasn't one of my particular favorites in the mic shootout. This was recorded with the AKG C414 BULS. After we started fleshing out the arrangement around her vocals, we realized that she needed a bit more high-end presence. So I've got the channel EQ pulled up here, and I have a preference for EQ before compression. It's a highly debated topic, and my personal feeling about it is that the correct way of doing things is the way that sounds best. So if you find that you get a better result with the EQ after compression on a certain vocalist, go for it. When I can help it, I like EQ before compression because I find that boosting any bands and an EQ after compression leads to unwanted resonances peaking out in the vocals. This can make certain words or pitches poke out in the mix more than others. So that's just my personal take on it. So let's give this a listen in the mix.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting late and you're still not home.
So there's a lot of mid-range in the instrumental already, and for a solid-state mic and a singer with a brighter timbre, there's quite a bit of mid-range saturation and focus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to boost her high-end sibilance to help her cut through the mix better, and I'll also filter out some of this extraneous low range here.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting still not home.
I'll also add a high mid-frequency bump, kind of like I did in the last video, and I'll sweep this around and find a nice spot for it.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting late and you're still not home.
Yeah, I don't want any of those whistling areas. I want this to be a very natural sounding boost, and this boost will be different for every song and it'll be different for every singer. So this is not something that you can load up in a preset. The key of the song will dictate where the over and under resonating frequencies are for this. So for this, a boost around 1K sounded pretty nice. And I'll use the high pass filter to simultaneously cut out any of the low frequency guttural sounds, but I'll also use the feedback in the filter here to add a boost just below her fundamental frequency.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting late and you're still not home. And I can't force myself to sleep.
And even though her fundamental is kind of like up here, you don't want to pull this up too high because it'll start to sound kind of boxy. This really should be a low frequency boost that's not quite in the sub-low frequency range, but it should be somewhere between around 50 and 100 hertz. And again, this is dictated by the key of the song and how high or low she's singing. When it comes to mixing, I high pass pretty much all of my vocals. I don't want the low end cluttered up with a bunch of muddy bass frequencies. I like to carve out this range for instruments that actually need to be there, so things like kick drum and bass.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting late and you're still not home. Myself to sleep.
So the frequency balance sounds a lot better, but some parts are still too loud and others are too soft. So let's level out the dynamics with Logic's compressor. For this, I'll use the vintage opto circuit again, and I don't like to use the auto gain function in Logic's compressor, so I always turn that off. It automatically adds gain when you compress the vocal, and it tends to overcompensate a bit and make the vocal too loud. So what I do is manually dial in my makeup gain after compressing. I like to start around the 4:1 to 5:1 ratio range, and then dial back the threshold until I see about 5 dB of reduction at the peak moments. I'll also pull the knee up to a soft knee for a more gentle threshold. And I'll go with a slower attack time to let some of the transients in the words come through.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting late, and you're still not home. And I can't force myself to sleep until you're safe here, lying next to me.
If you used a solid-state condenser mic for your recording and you want to add a bit of saturation in at this point, the distortion unit is pretty good for this. And don't misunderstand the labels here. A soft distortion will result in a more rounded, natural saturated signal, so it'll actually be more noticeable. The hard and clip distortion will actually be a softer effect.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting late, and you're still not home.
Once you've leveled out the dynamics, you can dial in a manual makeup gain to set the vocals on top of the music.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting late, and you're still not home. And I can't force myself to sleep.
I'll give this one more listen and I'll kick in my time-based effects here on my effects send for some added delay and ambience.
Touch it, so where did you go? It's getting late, and you're still not home. And I can't force myself to sleep.
So that's how I'd go about EQing and compressing soft female vocals to make them stand on top of a very mid-ranged instrumental.